No cameras, no press conference, no breaking news alert, just two leaders, two of the Arab world's most powerful states, and a blueprint for a Middle East that does not need America's permission to exist. The meetings happened, the agreements were signed, the money moved, the military cooperation deepened, and Washington, distracted, understaffed, and focused on everything except the region it has dominated for 80 consecutive years, missed it. Not entirely, not completely, but enough. Enough for Egypt and Saudi Arabia to lay foundations that are now too deep to remove. Enough to construct a regional architecture so advanced that by the time Washington fully understands what has been built, the only remaining question will be how America fits into it, not whether it exists. This is not a rumor. This is not geopolitical speculation dressed in dramatic language. This is the most significant structural shift in the Middle East since the United States replaced Britain as the region's dominant external power in the 1950s. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, president of Egypt, former military commander, the man Washington has alternatively embraced and criticized, funded and threatened, needed and resented for over a decade. Petrodollar architecture and built a military partnership with Pakistan that changed the regional deterrence equation, all while the world was arguing about whether he was a reformer or an autocrat. Together, they are building something that neither could build alone. And the implications for Iran, for Israel, for Turkey, for China, and most of all for the United States are going to redefine this region for the next 50 years. But to understand the full scope of what is happening, you have to understand something that most Western analysis consistently gets wrong. You have to understand what Egypt actually is, not what Washington thinks it is, not what the IMF balance sheets say it is, but what it has always been across centuries of history, and why it is the single indispensable piece of any serious Arab regional order. Because once you understand Egypt's real weight, everything that MBS is doing with it makes complete and devastating sense. Egypt is not a normal country. That is not hyperbole. It is a geographic, demographic, and historical fact that shapes everything about how the Middle East works. Egypt is the most populous Arab state by a significant margin, over 105 million people. It sits at the intersection of Africa and Asia, controlling the Suez Canal, one of the most strategically critical waterways on Earth, through which approximately 12% of global trade passes in normal times. It has the Arab world's largest military by personnel. It has the Arab world's oldest and most deeply institutionalized state bureaucracy. And it has something that no other Arab state has in the same measure: history. Cairo has been the intellectual, cultural, and political center of the Arab world for centuries. Al-Azhar University, based in Cairo, is the oldest and most authoritative institution of Sunni Islamic scholarship on earth. Egyptian media, Egyptian cinema, Egyptian literature, Egyptian music, these are not national phenomena. They are pan-Arab phenomena. They have shaped how hundreds of millions of Arabic speakers across 20 countries understand their own culture and identity. When Egypt moves, the Arab world notices. When Egypt commits to a direction, it gives that direction a legitimacy and a weight that no other single Arab state can provide. Saudi Arabia has money, it has oil, it has Islam's holiest sites. But Saudi Arabia, for all its wealth and all its recent transformation under MBS, does not have Egypt's combination of size, military mass, cultural authority, and geographic centrality. MBS understood this, and in the relationship being constructed right now, he is not positioning Saudi Arabia as Egypt's patron, the old model, where Gulf money flowed to Cairo in exchange for Egyptian deference. He is positioning Saudi Arabia and Egypt as co-architects, equal partners in the construction of a regional order that neither can build alone. That shift from patron-client to genuine partnership is the structural innovation at the heart of what is currently being built, and it changes everything about what this alliance can accomplish. To understand why this moment is happening now, you have to understand the relationship's history, because it has not always been partnership. For much of the 20th century, Egypt and Saudi Arabia were rivals, not always openly hostile, but fundamentally competitive for leadership of the Arab world. Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt, revolutionary secular nationalist, pan-Arab in ambition, represented exactly the kind of political force that the traditional, monarchical, religiously conservative Saudi kingdom feared and opposed. The two countries fought proxy wars in Yemen in the 1960s. Egypt backed the Republican revolutionaries. Saudi Arabia backed the royalists. It was, in miniature, the same ideological contest that would play out across the Arab world for decades. The 1979 Iranian Revolution changed the calculation for both countries. A revolutionary Shia Islamic state that explicitly threatened the legitimacy of Sunni Arab governments was a more dangerous adversary than either Cairo or Riyadh had faced from each other. Shared threat created shared interest. The relationship deepened fitfully through the 1980s and 1990s, defined primarily by Saudi financial support for Egypt's chronically struggling economy and Egyptian military and diplomatic weight on behalf of Saudi-backed positions in various regional contexts. But it was never a relationship of equals. Saudi Arabia had money, Egypt needed money, the dependency was real, and it distorted the relationship in ways that prevented genuine strategic partnership. Then Abdel Fattah el-Sisi came to power in Egypt in 2013, and MBS began his rise in Saudi Arabia around the same time. Two men, two countries, two completely different power bases, but a shared understanding of regional reality that proved to be the foundation for something new. Sisi and MBS are not obvious partners by temperament or background. Sisi is a military man, cautious, institutional, deeply embedded in Egypt's state apparatus, a product of the Egyptian armed forces, which is not just a military, but a parallel economic and political system that controls significant portions of the Egyptian economy and considers itself the ultimate guardian of Egyptian national stability. MBS is the opposite in almost every dimension. Young, fast-moving, risk-tolerant, willing to break institutions that obstruct his agenda rather than work within them. A businessman prince who remade the Saudi state around his personal authority in a way that has no parallel in Egyptian political culture. And yet they found each other, because what they share is more important than what separates them. They both look at the Middle East of the 2020s and see the same thing, a region that has been defined by other people's agendas, American, Iranian, Turkish, Israeli, for too long. A region where the Arab states that should be setting the terms have instead been reacting to decisions made in Washington, in Tehran, in Ankara, in Moscow. They both want that to end, and they have both concluded, through different paths and different reasoning, that ending it requires building an Arab regional order powerful enough to set its own terms, strong enough to manage its own security, independent enough to negotiate with external powers from a position of genuine leverage rather than structural dependency. That shared conclusion is what is driving the construction happening right now. The visible layer of the Egypt-Saudi partnership is economic, and even at the visible layer, the scale is extraordinary. Saudi investment in Egypt has accelerated dramatically in the last 3 years. The Public Investment Fund, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund under MBS's direct oversight, has committed tens of billions of dollars to Egyptian infrastructure, real estate, energy, and industrial projects. The Ras Al Hekma deal, announced in early 2024, was the headline number that forced the world to pay attention. Saudi Arabia and UAE entities committed approximately $35 billion to develop a new city and economic zone on Egypt's Mediterranean coast. For Egypt, drowning in a foreign exchange crisis and negotiating desperately with the IMF for a bailout, the injection was economic oxygen. But that transaction, as significant as it was, is not the core of what is being built. It is the entry point, the visible surface of an arrangement that goes much deeper, because the economic relationship is being constructed to create a specific strategic outcome, to reduce Egypt's dependency on IMF conditionality, and by extension on American financial leverage over Cairo, by replacing that dependency with Gulf financing that comes with different conditions. Conditions set in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, not in Washington. This is not incidental. It is the point. For decades, Egypt's chronic economic vulnerability was a lever that Washington used, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, to influence Egyptian foreign policy. American military aid, American support for IMF programs, American diplomatic backing in international financial institutions, these were the instruments that gave Washington meaningful influence over what Egypt's government did. As Gulf investment replaces IMF dependency as Egypt's financial lifeline, those instruments lose their effectiveness. Sisi understands this completely. He is not naive about what Saudi investment means. He is choosing it deliberately, with open eyes, because the conditions attached to Gulf money are conditions he can live with in ways that IMF conditionality and American policy demands are not. The security dimension of the partnership is less visible, but it is the dimension that matters most for understanding where the Middle East is heading. Egypt and Saudi Arabia have been conducting a systematic expansion of their military cooperation that goes well beyond the joint exercises and defense agreements that regional neighbors routinely maintain. Egyptian military officers are embedded in Saudi planning structures at levels that have no precedent in the modern relationship. Joint operational concepts are being developed for scenarios that neither country has previously planned for together. Defense industrial cooperation. Egypt has a significant domestic arms manufacturing capacity that Saudi Arabia lacks, is creating supply chain relationships that reduce both countries' dependency on external weapon suppliers for certain categories of military equipment. And the strategic logic driving all of this is Iran. Not Iran as an abstract threat. Iran as a specific, urgent, operationally planning problem for both Cairo and Riyadh. Saudi Arabia's concerns about Iran are well documented. The Houthi threat in Yemen, backed by Iranian weapons and guidance. The network of Iranian proxy forces across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon that encircles the Gulf from multiple directions. The Iranian nuclear program advancing toward a capability that would permanently alter the regional deterrence equation. Egypt's concerns about Iran are less discussed in Western media, but equally serious. Iranian influence in Sudan, which sits on Egypt's southern border, has been expanding. Iranian relationships with non-state actors in Libya, where Egypt has a direct security interest in the ongoing conflict, create threats to Egypt's western flank. And an Iran that achieves nuclear capability would fundamentally alter Egypt's security environment in ways that Cairo has no current answer to. Both countries need a regional security architecture capable of deterring, and if necessary, confronting Iranian power. Neither can build it alone. Together, with Saudi wealth funding Egyptian military mass, with Egyptian strategic depth backing Saudi financial power, with Pakistani military capability providing the professional operational backbone, they are constructing something that begins to look like a genuine regional security system, something that does not require American permission to operate, something that does not require the Seventh Fleet or the presence of American air power at regional bases to function as a deterrent, something self-sustaining. Here's where Trump becomes the unwitting enabler of exactly what he would not want to enable. The Trump administration came to office in 2025 with a Middle East policy built around three pillars: pressure on Iran, support for Israel, transactional engagement with the Gulf states focused on arms sales and investment commitments to the American economy. What the Trump administration did not prioritize, what it explicitly deprioritized through its staffing decisions, its diplomatic posture, and its focus on other regions and other issues, was the kind of sustained, institutionalized American engagement with Arab states that previous administrations had used to maintain Washington's centrality in regional affairs. The relationships were maintained at the leadership level. Trump's personal relationships with MBS and with Sisi are genuine and warm. The phone calls happen. The White House visits are scheduled. But relationships at the leadership level are not the same as institutional presence. They are not the same as having senior American diplomats embedded in regional capitals, tracking the details of what is being constructed, raising concerns through the channels that actually influence decisions before those decisions are made. The institutional American presence in the Middle East has thinned, and in the space created by that thinning, in the diplomatic vacuum that American distraction has opened, Egypt and Saudi Arabia are moving with a speed and an ambition that a more attentive Washington might have questioned, complicated, or at minimum tracked more carefully. They are moving while the Americans are looking elsewhere. And by the time Washington fully processes what has been built, the architecture will be sufficiently advanced that questioning it will not change its direction, only its terms. Turkey is watching this with a combination of alarm and recalibration that deserves specific attention. Ankara has spent the last decade positioning itself as the alternative pan-Islamic and pan-Arab leadership center. The Erdogan government's activism across the Arab world, in Libya, in Qatar, in Somalia, in various contexts across the Muslim world, has been explicitly framed as Turkish leadership of a Muslim community that the Arab states had failed to adequately lead. An Egypt-Saudi axis of the scale and depth being constructed now directly challenges that positioning. Egypt and Turkey have had a deeply hostile relationship since Sisi's 2013 removal of Mohammed Morsi, who was backed by Turkey and the Muslim Brotherhood. Riyadh and Ankara have been competitive across multiple regional contexts. The deepening of the Cairo-Riyadh partnership sends a clear signal to Ankara. The Arab states are building their own order. Turkey can engage with that order on the terms the Arab states set. Or Turkey can continue its current approach and find itself progressively marginalized from the region's most important new dynamics. Erdogan is a pragmatic politician beneath the ideological positioning. He reads structural shifts, and he is reading this one. The recent warming in Egyptian-Turkish relations, quiet, incremental, but real, is partly a response to Ankara's recognition that the Egypt-Saudi axis is becoming the dominant structural fact of Arab regional politics. If Turkey cannot beat it, it needs to find a way to engage with it. That calculation, that regional actors are adjusting their positioning in response to the emerging Egypt-Saudi order, is itself evidence of how significant the shift is. When your construction changes other people's strategies, you are building something real. Israel is the most complicated piece of this picture, and the Egypt-Saudi relationship has direct implications for the most significant. Potential diplomatic development in the region, Saudi-Israeli normalization. The Abraham Accords of 2020, which normalized relations between Israel and the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, were, in the American framing, the foundation for a broader regional realignment that would eventually include Saudi Arabia, a Saudi, Israeli normalization deal, backed by American security guarantees to Riyadh and American support for Saudi civilian nuclear ambitions, was the strategic prize that multiple administrations had been working toward. That deal has not happened. And the Gaza conflict that began in October 2023 and the sustained Israeli military operations that followed created political conditions in the Arab world that made any Saudi government's public normalization with Israel domestically difficult to manage. But beneath the public political obstacles, the strategic logic of Saudi-Israeli engagement has not disappeared. Both countries share a primary threat in Iran. Both have interests in regional stability that, in many dimensions, align more than they conflict. What the Egypt-Saudi partnership changes is the terms on which any eventual Saudi-Israeli normalization would occur, and it changes them significantly. A Saudi Arabia that is the co-anchor of a genuine Arab regional security system, that has Egypt's military mass and Pakistan's professional military capability and the Gulf states' financial resources behind it, is a Saudi Arabia that negotiates with Israel from a fundamentally different position than the Saudi Arabia of 10 years ago. It is a Saudi Arabia that can demand real Palestinian state progress, not symbolic gestures, that can insist on security guarantees of a specific character, that can walk away from a deal that does not meet its terms without existential anxiety. The Egypt-Saudi partnership gives MBS leverage in the normalization negotiation that he would not otherwise have. It makes the deal, if it eventually comes, a Saudi deal rather than an American brokered arrangement that Saudi Arabia joins. The difference matters enormously for the Palestinians, for Israel, for the regional order that follows whatever agreement is eventually reached. The Suez Canal is the piece of this story that most directly connects Egypt's structural power to the emerging regional architecture. Approximately 12 to 15% of global trade passes through the Suez Canal in normal operating conditions. Oil, container ships, bulk carriers, liquefied natural gas. The canal is a choke point of extraordinary strategic and economic importance. During the Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping that began in late 2023, attacks using Iranian-supplied weapon systems, against commercial vessels as a pressure campaign related to the Gaza conflict, Suez Canal traffic dropped dramatically. Ships rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks and significant costs to global supply chains. The episode demonstrated two things simultaneously. First, that the canal's strategic importance is not theoretical. When it is threatened, the global economy feels it immediately and painfully. Second, that the security of the canal, and by extension the security of the Red Sea approaches, is a regional problem that requires regional solutions. American naval presence in the Red Sea during the Houthi crisis was significant but was not sufficient and was not sustainable indefinitely. Egypt controls the canal. Egypt's military posture in the Red Sea region is therefore directly relevant to the security of one of the world's most critical trade arteries. And Egypt's ability to contribute to Red Sea security is directly enhanced by Saudi financial and military cooperation. The Egypt-Saudi partnership, in this context, is not just a bilateral relationship between two Arab states pursuing their individual interests. It is the foundational institutional arrangement for securing one of the arteries of global trade. That fact gives the partnership a global significance that extends far beyond the Arab world. China, which depends on Red Sea, shipping for its trade with Europe, has a direct interest in the stability of the arrangement. India, which is building its own Red Sea naval presence, is watching. European governments, traumatized by the Houthi disruption to their supply chains, are quietly supportive. The Egypt-Saudi partnership is inserting itself into the security architecture of global commerce. That is not a regional story. That is a world story. The African dimension of this partnership is the least discussed and potentially the most consequential for the long term. Egypt is an African state. Its southern border runs with Sudan. Beyond Sudan lies the vast expanse of sub-Saharan Africa, a continent of 1.4 billion people, extraordinary natural resources, and rapidly growing strategic importance in the competition between great powers for their relationships and resources that will define the 21st century. Saudi Arabia, through the PIF, has been making significant investments across Africa: energy, agriculture, infrastructure, financial, services. The continent is a target of Saudi economic ambition in ways that were not true even 5 years ago. Egypt, with its geographic position, its historical relationships across northeastern and eastern Africa, and its significant diaspora presence across the continent, is the natural gateway and partner for Saudi-African strategy. The Egypt-Saudi partnership is therefore not bounded by the Middle East. It is a platform for engagement with Africa that gives both countries reach and influence across a continent that the United States has consistently underinvested in diplomatically and economically. As Africa's strategic importance grows, and it is growing rapidly as China's presence deepens and as the competition for African relationships intensifies, the Egypt-Saudi platform for African engagement becomes progressively more valuable. This is another dimension of the emerging order that Washington, focused on its traditional Middle Eastern preoccupations, is not adequately tracking. What does America do when it realizes what has been built? This is the question that serious analysts in Washington are beginning to ask. Not the analysts who are still operating on the assumption that American centrality in the Middle East is a permanent feature of the landscape, but the smaller number who are tracking the structural shifts with the attention they deserve. The honest answer is that American options are more limited than they would have been 5 or 10 years ago. Military leverage over Egypt and Saudi Arabia has declined. The financial leverage that American backing for IMF programs provided is being replaced by Gulf investment. The security dependency that made both countries susceptible to American pressure is being reduced by the self-sufficient regional security architecture under construction. What America retains is significant but different from what it had. It retains the world's most powerful military, with bases and relationships across the region that are not going away. It retains the dollar's reserve currency status, weakened but not broken. It retains technology in defense systems and artificial intelligence and advanced manufacturing that neither Egypt nor Saudi Arabia can fully replicate domestically. And it retains the ability to be a partner in the new order rather than the architect of the old one. That is the strategic choice Washington faces. It can resist the emerging Egypt-Saudi architecture through financial pressure, arms restrictions, diplomatic opposition, and accelerate both countries' movement toward alternative partnerships with China and Russia that would genuinely threaten American interests in ways that the current construction does not. Or it can engage with the new order on the terms it actually exists, rather than the terms Washington prefers. It can work with Egypt and Saudi Arabia as genuine partners in a multipolar Middle East, rather than as clients in an American-dominated one. The second path requires a humility about American power that has been difficult for Washington to summon. It requires accepting that the Middle East of the 2020s is not the Middle East of the 1990s, that the rules have changed, that the architecture is being rebuilt whether America participates or not. Trump, paradoxically, may be better positioned psychologically to make that adjustment than more institutionalist predecessors. His transactional worldview, his comfort with deals rather than architectures, with relationships rather than systems, might allow him to engage with the new Middle Eastern order on its own terms in ways that more ideologically committed American foreign policy traditions would resist. The question is whether the recognition of what has been built arrives in time for that engagement to shape the new order's direction rather than simply acknowledge its existence. Egypt and Saudi Arabia are not building against America. That distinction matters, and is frequently lost in analysis that frames every non-American initiative as inherently anti-American. What Cairo and Riyadh are building is a regional order that serves Arab interests as Arabs define them, that manages Arab security according to Arab priorities, that develops Arab economies through Arab-directed investment and Arab-negotiated partnerships. That is not anti-American. It is post-American in a specific sense. It does not require American approval to function, American financing to survive, or American military presence to be secure. The difference between anti-American and post-American is the difference between an adversary and an independent actor. And independent actors, in a multipolar world, are negotiated with rather than managed, engaged rather than directed. That transition from managed client to independent actor is what Egypt and Saudi Arabia are completing right now. 2 leaders, 2 countries, 2 historical centers of Arab civilization. One shared vision of a region that manages its own affairs, secures its own future, and negotiates with external powers from genuine strength rather than structural dependency. Sisi brings Egypt's irreplaceable combination: military mass, geographic centrality, demographic weight, cultural authority, and the Suez Canal's global strategic significance. MBS brings Saudi Arabia's equally irreplaceable combination: financial resources, energy leverage, Islamic authority, and a decade of strategic positioning that has already changed the global energy order. Together, they are building something that neither could build alone: an Arab regional order, not perfect, not without internal contradictions and competing interests that will require constant management, not insulated from the crises that the Middle East reliably produces, but real, functional, self-sustaining in a way that previous attempts at Arab regional architecture never achieved. And it is being built right now, behind the back of an administration too distracted to fully track it, in the space created by American disengagement, with a speed that reflects both the urgency of the moment and the clarity of the strategic vision driving it. The Middle East that exists on the other side of this construction will look fundamentally different from the one that America has managed for 80 years. The rules will be different. The power will be distributed differently. The leverage will sit in different hands. And the countries that understood this shift early enough to shape the new architecture, rather than simply react to it once it was complete, will be the ones who define what the next 50 years of Middle Eastern history looks like. Egypt and Saudi Arabia understood it. They are shaping it, right now. While Washington watches something else, the only question that remains is not whether this new Middle East gets built. It is already being built. The only question is whether America joins it as a partner, or wakes up one day to find itself a guest in a house it used to own.